Assalamualaikum and a very good day to everyone. Today I am going to explain to you our very last chapter, and that is cultural competence for interaction. These are the few things that we are going to look at in this topic, and they are how to be culturally competent in an interaction, as well as cross-cultural communication styles, and that is high context versus low context. Now, when we talk about being a Malaysian, Malaysia is a multiracial and multicultural country, and on top of that, we are also multilingual country, which means we are consisted of many races, such as the Malays, the Chinese, the Indians, the Sabahans, the Sarawakians, so on and so forth. Now, being in a country where we have many races, we have to know one thing, that when we are set to go out to work, we will be facing with a lot of people with a different racial background. So we'll be having colleagues of Malays, Chinese, Indians, so on and so forth. The question now is, how are we supposed to continue our work when we go out and work and have our colleagues of different backgrounds, of different races, at the same place? So the key point here is to understand the differences and try to adapt to the differences in order to ensure prosperity, mutual respect, as well as tolerance among us. And this is also to ensure that the work that is given to us, or whatever things that we are doing at the workplace, they are done accordingly, without any hassles among us. Now, when we talk about being a Malaysian, because since we are not comprised of a mono race, which means a country that has only one race, we have many races, and therefore there are few things that we have to consider whenever we want to interact with each other. The first one is, of course, we have to be sensitive towards one's culture. Now, different races, they bring along different cultures with them, and in order for us to understand them better, we need to understand their cultures. Now, how many of us do actually understand the culture that is brought by some other races? Now, we may understand perhaps on the surface level, but not many of us do understand in depth the culture of our colleagues of different races. Now, I give you an example. For instance, it is part of the Malay culture, that we when we talk to someone who is superior than us, who is older than us, we tend to use a lower tone, that is out of respect, as well as we will address that person as Puan or Cik or Encik, or if there is a salutation or titles like doctor, associate professor, because we would like them, these people, to know that we are actually addressing someone who is older. But in different cultures, perhaps they think that is it's not a necessity, for a person to address another person by calling them Puan, Cik, or even if we are out of context, which means if, let's say, we meet someone who is older than us in the market, for instance, we would just say Pakcik, makcik, puan, sorry, pakcik, makcik, uncle, auntie. Why do we have these calling names? Yeah, because we want to show our sense of respect. But to other cultures, perhaps this is something new. You know, this is something new. That is why a lot of people from the Western countries, they are baffled by this act, because they thought that everyone here in Malaysia is related to each other by calling them uncles and aunties. Now, another aspect for us to be sensitive towards too is their beliefs, you know. Now, if I give an example, not many of us are culturally sensitive towards another culture. Now, the Indians, for instance, there are few days that they will fast, which means they will not eat anything, meat-based. So they will fast, and they will not eat meat. Of course, beef is prohibited in the Indian culture and beliefs. So, but whenever we have gatherings among our colleagues, are we culturally sensitive towards that issue? You know, whenever we want to hire a caterer, for instance, we should consider of having meals or vegetarian meals for the vegetarian colleagues of ours. You know, because as I mentioned to you just now, you know, the Indians, they have certain days that they fast, and they and they only eat vegetables based food. So sometimes it can be on Tuesday or Friday. And on top of that, when we want to prepare the food, how many of us actually consider of replacing the use of beef to the use of chicken, so that everyone can eat? Because the Indians and the Buddhists, they don't eat meat, or they don't eat beef. I mean, the Indians, they don't eat beef, but they can eat the chicken. But of course, and how many of us are culturally sensitive, you know, when we want to cook the vegetables, to make sure that there's no meat in it, so the vegetarian can also eat the vegetables. You know, these are the things that we may want to consider when we talk about belief, as well as language. Yeah, you know, we talk about language, sometimes we realize that there are things that are very distinctive when it comes to communication. For instance, yeah, a lot of beliefs, when they speak something, when they say something, they will say it twice or more than once. You know, they like to repeat things because they want some sort of like assurance, like ya saya pergi, ya saya pergi, ya. So the word ya is repeated more than once, just to have an assurance, you know, like a confirmation. The Chinese, for instance, they cannot pronounce the word R. So instead of having like lorry, it becomes like lorry. So they replace L with R. You see, because they cannot. They are, because this is one of the features that they have. And how many of us are actually sensitive towards that? You know, instead of making fun of these so-called differences, why not we try to understand why they cannot speak certain words or certain alphabets? Now, when we talk about diversity in a workplace, yeah, these are the few steps that we can do in order for us to ensure that there is a continuity of cooperation among us of different races and backgrounds. Now, the first one that we need to do is to understand diversity. First, we have to understand why diversity happens in the workplace, because we are not a mono-race country. We have a lot of races, so that's why we have to understand that. Yeah. Number two, we have to value and embrace the diversity. We have to start to appreciate the differences. And we have to embrace the fact that there are differences. And we have to accept the fact that we have to understand, we have to learn the differences or the diversity among us, so that when we learn and we understand this, then we know, when we are fully aware what are the differences and what are the common things that we share among us. And of course, the last step is to adapt the differences. Now, the reason why we need to adapt, so that it becomes part of us, you see, it becomes part of us, so that later it will just happen naturally, you see. So it will happen just naturally. Whenever you are set to go to a new place, for instance, you just know what to do. Whenever you have Indian friends, Chinese, and other races, you just know what to do, because why? You have adapted the differences from the previous place. Now, another aspect that I would like to talk about is high context and versus low context. You see, now what is high context and what is low context? Yeah. Now let me explain to you. Now, whenever we have an interaction with people of high context, the people of high context, normally they will have indirect and implicit messages. That means when they say something, there will always be an indirect meaning. There will always be an underlying meaning that we have to understand, which means whenever they say something, you just have to read between the lines. You just have to understand the implicit meaning. And they used non-verbal communication a lot. Facial expressions, intonations, body gestures, etc. And their reliance on the written communication is very low. They like to talk, they like to meet in person, they like to meet face to face. They don't like to use emails, mails, text messages, WhatsApp, so on and so forth. They just don't. And to a point that if they couldn't meet you, they'll just call you up, so that you will just get the message directly from that person. And a lot of these people, they will just use their intuition and feelings to make decisions, yeah. And then they would go for long-term relationships rather than a short-term relationship, right? And countries like Japan, Mexico, and even the Middle East countries, and even Malaysia, we have this high context visibility in our interaction. Now, comparing high context to the low context, they are very direct, they're very simple, and they're very clear when it comes to messages. And they used non-verbal communications very little. That's why a lot of people tend to understand that the Westerners, they tend to be very expressionless, emotionless. Why? Because they don't really use a lot of non-verbal communication, and they rely a lot on written communication. They like to write letters, sending emails. Emails will be on the top of the list. Sending messages, using all kind of means of communication. And they rely on facts and evidence when they make decisions. Yeah, they don't go for intuitions. They don't feel pity for you. They don't just try to, not that they're not sensitive about that, but then again, they just have to rely on facts and evidence because they have their rules and regulations, yeah. And they go for short-term relationships, not long-term relationships. And countries like UK, US, German, I'm so sorry for this, the typo, yeah, Germany, they would just have this low context instead of high context. So I suppose that is the end for our for me explaining about this topic. So I hope you do understand. If there is anything that you need to ask, you can always ask me in the class. I guess that's all for today. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum.